July 13th, 1985. Something impossible was about to happen at Wembley Stadium, but nobody knew it yet. Four men were about to walk onto that stage, men who hadn't even been speaking to each other for months. In 20 minutes, they would rewrite music history. But that morning, standing in their cramped trailer backstage, they could barely believe they'd survived the day. Freddie Mercury's throat was on fire. The doctor had been clear, "Don't sing today. Your voice can't handle it." But there was no universe where Freddie wouldn't go on. Behind him, Roger Taylor tuned his drums in silence. John Deacon plucked soft bass notes just to feel something familiar. Brian May stared out the small window at the massive stage in the distance, the stage that would either end or save their story. 6 months earlier, Queen had been falling apart. Their last album flopped. American tours had stalled. The press had turned vicious after their controversial decision to play Sun City in South Africa. But worse than the headlines was the silence between them. Freddie had gone solo. The others barely spoke. The magic that had once filled arenas was fading into nothing. When Bob Geldof announced Live Aid, a massive charity concert to fight famine in Ethiopia, Queen wasn't on his list. In fact, he didn't want them at all. "They've peaked," he told his team. "They're done." But promoter Harvey Goldsmith disagreed. He'd seen Queen live. He knew what they could do. "Put them in the afternoon slot," he insisted. "When the crowd gets tired, they'll wake everyone up." Still, Geldof hesitated. Queen was a risk he wasn't sure he wanted to take. The band themselves weren't confident either. They hadn't played together properly in months. The chemistry was broken. When they finally agreed to perform, it was quiet, almost reluctant. None of them could have guessed this hesitant yes would become the most legendary 20 minutes in music history. After months apart, walking back into that rehearsal room felt like entering neutral ground. The air was heavy. Freddie was guarded. Roger kept to himself. John spoke little. Brian tried to bridge the silence, but the gaps between them felt wider than ever. At first, they rehearsed like strangers relearning a language they'd once spoken fluently. When they began playing Bohemian Rhapsody, the room filled with awkward nostalgia. It was like a family remembering how to talk after years of distance. But slowly, something started to change. As Freddie struck those piano keys and Roger's snare echoed through the space, the walls began to feel alive again. The songs they'd written a decade earlier, the songs that built their empire, were waking up. By the second day, they were laughing again. By the third, the harmonies had returned. Brian watched it happen from across the room. He could see the old fire behind Freddie's eyes, that spark that had once lit arenas worldwide. There was a moment during rehearsal when Freddie hit a single note, and Brian thought to himself, "There he is, the real Freddie, like lightning coming back to life." They practiced relentlessly, perfecting every second of their 20-minute set. While other bands planned to showcase new material, Queen made a different choice. They would give the world everything people loved most about Queen: pure energy, no ego, no spectacle, just music. When they left that rehearsal room, they weren't just prepared, they were dangerous again. The morning of Live Aid, Wembley Stadium buzzed with controlled chaos. Technicians rushed cables through puddles of yesterday's rain. Sound engineers shouted into headsets. The smell of metal and anticipation filled the air. But inside Queen's trailer, it was almost silent. Freddie sat wrapped in a white robe, staring at a cup of tea he wasn't drinking. The doctor's warning still echoed, "You shouldn't sing today." His bandmates gathered around him, each lost in their own thoughts. The crowd outside was already filling the stands, a sea of 70,000 people humming with anticipation. None of them knew the doubts unfolding behind the curtain. Then Freddie stood up, slipped on his white tank top and studded armband, and looked at his bandmates with a grin that felt like defiance. "Let's do what we came here to do," he said softly. Minutes later, Queen began walking toward the stage. Four silhouettes stepping out of doubt and into destiny. When they stepped into the light, time seemed to hold its breath. No fireworks, no special effects, no grand opening. Just four men and their instruments. Freddie took his place behind the piano, his tank top gleaming under the afternoon sun. The crowd was still shifting, talking, restless. Cameras zoomed in, expecting another ordinary set from another band past their prime. Then the first chord of Bohemian Rhapsody rang out. It wasn't just a note. It was an announcement. The sound filled the air, sharp and alive, echoing through every corner of Wembley. Freddie's voice, though slightly rough, carried with impossible strength. Roger's drums struck like thunder. Brian's guitar sang with perfect control. John's bass held it all steady, the heartbeat beneath the storm. Something electric rippled through the crowd. People who'd been chatting suddenly stopped. A wave of silence rolled over the stadium, followed by a collective roar that shook the cameras. In that moment, nobody was thinking about Africa or famine or fundraising. They were witnessing rebirth. As Freddie moved from piano to microphone, the rhythm shifted into Radio Gaga. His hands clapped above his head. The audience mirrored him instantly, tens of thousands of palms slapping the air in perfect unison. Just like that, Queen had them. Every hand, every voice, every heartbeat. By the time Radio Gaga hit its chorus, Wembley had stopped being a crowd. It had become an instrument. 70,000 voices, 70,000 claps, one rhythm. The stadium pulsed like a single living heart, and at its center stood Freddie Mercury, a man who hours before could barely speak. He wasn't singing to the audience anymore. He was singing with them. Every gesture, every glance, every flash of his eyes seemed to command the sky itself. The energy pouring from him was magnetic, the kind of power that can't be rehearsed or planned. It just happens. Roger locked in behind the drums, grinning as the sea of people moved in sync with every beat. John's bass rumbled like a heartbeat beneath the noise. Brian stepped forward into the sunlight, his guitar glinting as the first notes of Hammer to Fall ripped through the air. Looking out at that ocean of faces, Brian later recalled thinking, "This isn't a concert anymore. It's a conversation." Freddie was talking to the world in a language only he could speak, and the world, for once, was listening. The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky gold. As Crazy Little Thing Called Love rolled in, Freddie danced across the stage, his microphone stand spinning like an extension of his own heartbeat. The fear of the morning was gone, the doubts erased. Now only the music remained, unstoppable and free. Halfway through their set, something intangible shifted. You could feel it like static in the air before a storm. From the stage, the sea of faces looked endless. Every camera flash was a heartbeat. Every echo of Freddie's voice bounced off the steel of Wembley and came back 10 times louder. Queen weren't performing for the audience anymore. They were performing because of them. Backstage, Bob Geldof stood frozen, jaw slightly open, staring at the monitors. He doubted them. He'd nearly left them off the lineup entirely, and now his expression said what everyone else was thinking. This was perfection, the kind of magic nobody could manufacture. As Hammer to Fall crashed into its final chords, Brian's guitar soared, slicing through the air like light. Freddie, drenched in sweat, threw his head back and laughed. A real laugh, the kind his friends hadn't heard in years. It was the sound of joy returning, of life instead of survival. When they transitioned into We Will Rock You, something clicked between them. A silent acknowledgement that this was it. The second chance, the redemption. Backstage technicians stopped what they were doing. Other artists leaned against the scaffolding, watching quietly. Elton John whispered to someone nearby, "They've stolen the show." As the final notes of Crazy Little Thing Called Love faded into the warm hum of the crowd, Freddie stepped back, catching his breath. The band glanced at each other. There were no words needed. Then Roger counted them in with 4 soft taps of his sticks. The opening beat of We Will Rock You thundered across Wembley like the pulse of a giant. The crowd stomped and clapped, 100,000 boots and palms echoing against the sky. When the song ended, Freddie didn't stop. He leaned into the microphone and whispered, "All right, my beauties, let's do this together." Then came We Are the Champions. The piano began softly, almost fragile. Freddie's voice, strained from the long day, carried a weight that wasn't just performance, it was confession. Every lyric felt like a reflection on everything they'd endured, the fights, the fatigue, the doubt, the years of being misunderstood. For those few minutes, time dissolved. The audience wasn't an audience anymore. It was a choir. The sky itself seemed to sing. Roger's drums built like thunder beneath the words. Brian's guitar rose like a cry of triumph, and Freddie, eyes closed, lifted the microphone high as if declaring victory over every hardship that had ever tried to silence them. When the song ended, he stood there for a moment, still glowing in the gold light of sunset, and smiled. It wasn't arrogance. It was peace. Everyone watching, whether at Wembley or halfway across the world, understood it then. This wasn't just Queen's comeback. It was their resurrection. When the last note faded into the roar of the crowd, Queen walked off stage slowly, not triumphantly, but quietly, like men who had just survived something bigger than themselves. The hallway behind Wembley's main stage was narrow and dim. The sound of applause still thundered through the concrete walls. Freddie was breathing hard, his voice shot, his shirt drenched. Roger set his sticks down and leaned against the wall, laughing breathlessly. John just stared at the floor, lost in thought. Brian followed behind, guitar still in hand. When they came off that stage, none of them spoke. There was nothing to say. They'd just witnessed something sacred, and words would have spoiled it. Outside, Bob Geldof was trying to rally the next act. When Queen passed him, he stopped mid-sentence, looked at Freddie, and muttered under his breath, "You've just stolen the day." Inside the band's trailer, it was calm. Freddie dropped into a chair, reached for a towel, and finally exhaled. "Thank God that's over," he said with a laugh. But even he knew it wasn't over. Something had changed. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the muffled echo of the next act taking the stage. The cheers still hadn't faded. None of them said it, but they all felt it. Something had been reborn out there, and for the first time in years, Queen felt like Queen again. In the days that followed, the headlines said it all. Queen stole the show. Mercury's resurrection. Rock history rewritten. But inside the band, it wasn't about fame anymore. It was about something deeper. They'd come to the concert fractured, uncertain if there was even a band left to save. And they left as a family again. When Brian watched the footage later, he realized how perfectly it all came together. It wasn't planned that way. It just happened. That's what makes it magical, he thought. We didn't go out there to be the best. We just wanted to play. And somehow the universe did the rest. The press couldn't stop talking about them. Critics who had dismissed Queen as over the top now called them revolutionary. Radio stations replayed their 20-minute set on loop. For weeks, Queen was the most searched name in the music world. Freddie's white tank top became as iconic as his voice. Back in London, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Promoters, producers, record labels, everyone wanted Queen again. But for the four of them, what mattered most was something nobody else could see. That spark they'd lost had come back. Freddie called Brian one evening not long after. No hello, no small talk. Just, "Darling, let's get back in the studio. I've got ideas." That call changed everything. Within months, they were writing again. The energy was raw, the songs urgent. Live Aid had given them what no award or chart position ever could, a reason to keep creating. And though none of them said it out loud, they all knew it. That stage, that day, had saved not just their careers, but their souls. 40 years later, people still talk about that day. Some remember the songs, others remember the sound, that impossible roar of 100,000 voices moving as one. But for those who were there and for the millions who watched from their living rooms, Live Aid wasn't just a concert. It was a reminder that music at its core is still the most powerful force we have to unite strangers. Queen didn't just perform that day, they transcended. Every frame of that performance became part of history. Freddie in his white tank top, his fist raised to the sky, leading humanity in perfect rhythm. It's the kind of image that doesn't fade. It imprints itself on time. After Live Aid, Queen weren't just back. They were immortal. Their albums soared. Their tours sold out across continents. And Freddie shone brighter than ever, even as his body began to betray him. But if you ask Brian, Roger, or John what they remember most, it isn't the fame or the reviews or the money. It's the silence after the last note. That moment when they looked at each other and knew they'd just done something that would outlive them all. They didn't save the world that day, but maybe they saved themselves. And as the sun set over Wembley that July evening, the music didn't end. It never really does.